My fiancée saw my year-end bonus hit my account and smiled like she'd just been rescued. Then she told me exactly where it was going, her hidden debt, upgraded wedding extras, and whatever else her family decided we needed. When I said no, she said, "No bonus, no wedding." I said fine and canceled the venue before lunch. For context, I'm Mark, 33. My fiancée, Natalie, is 31. We'd been together 4 years, engaged for 8 months, and our wedding was 7 weeks away when this happened. On paper, we looked solid. I had a steady job as a project manager for a commercial roofing company. Natalie worked in social media for a local boutique group and picked up freelance brand work on the side. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. We had a decent apartment, 2 cars, and a wedding budget we had agreed on down to the dollar. That last part matters. Because Natalie loved the idea of being on the same page right up until the page said no. We had gone over the budget 3 separate times: venue, photographer, food, DJ, flowers, dress alterations, invitations, hotel block, everything. I paid the larger share because I earned more and I was okay with that. She covered smaller recurring expenses and some decor items she cared about more than I did. We had even joked that the only thing scarier than marriage was centerpiece pricing. So when my annual bonus hit on a Friday morning, I didn't think it would become the thing that blew the whole relationship apart. At 8:14 a.m., I got the payroll notification. At 8:16, Natalie texted, "How much was it?" Not good morning, not nice, just that. I replied with the number after taxes, $18,400. 3 dots appeared instantly. Then, perfect. That word should have warned me. When I got home that evening, she was waiting at the kitchen island with her laptop open, wedding spreadsheet up, and 2 glasses of wine poured like we were about to celebrate something. At first, I thought we were. She smiled and tapped the screen. "Okay, so I was thinking now that your bonus came in, we can fix a few things." "Fix what?" I asked. She turned the laptop toward me and started pointing. "Upgrade the floral package. Add the live sax player during cocktail hour. Extend the photographer another 2 hours. Switch the rehearsal dinner from the brewery room we booked to the private rooftop restaurant her cousin recommended. Cover some hair and makeup add-ons for her bridesmaids because, in her words, I'm not having a mismatched face line in my wedding photos." I stared at her. "Natalie," I said carefully, "we already set the budget." She waved that away. "This is exactly why bonuses exist." "No," I said, "bonuses exist because a company wants to retain employees." She gave me a look. "You know what I mean." I didn't know what she meant. She meant she had mentally spent money that wasn't hers before I had even gotten home. I sat down across from her. The bonus was going into savings. Half to rebuild the emergency fund after the vendor deposits, half toward the condo down payment after the wedding. That was the plan. Her smile thinned. Plans can change. Not by 18 grand. She leaned back and crossed her arms. "So you're really going to sit there and tell me you'd rather put money in an account than make sure your wedding doesn't look cheap?" That word, cheap. It always showed up when she wanted to turn self-control into a character flaw. "I'm saying," I replied, "we already planned a wedding we can afford. We're not blowing up the budget because extra money showed up." She stared at me for a second, then clicked to another tab, credit card statements, 3 of them. "I also need help clearing these," she said, suddenly softer, like this part had been tucked behind the prettier ask on purpose. "A lot of the wedding stuff went on my cards." I frowned. "How much?" She hesitated. That hesitation told me more than the answer did. "Natalie, how much?" "About 9,000. I actually laughed once because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. I looked at the statements. Hair trial charges, boutique receipts, a custom welcome sign, rush shipping fees, a hotel charge in Miami from 2 months earlier that I immediately recognized as her sister Brianna's birthday trip. I looked back up. "This isn't all wedding," she shrugged. "It got mixed together." "No, it didn't. This is just debt." She sat forward then, irritation replacing softness. "Okay, and we're getting married. My debt is your debt in a month anyway." That sentence did something to me. not because it was technically wrong in the abstract, but because of how casually she said it, like my bonus hadn't arrived, like it had been delivered. I pushed the statements back toward her. You told me you had about 2,000 left on one card. That was before some stuff came up. Stuff, I repeated. Or choices. Her jaw tightened. Before she could answer, the front door opened. Her mother, Carol, walked in without knocking, followed by Brianna carrying a garment bag and iced coffees like they were joining a strategy session. That should tell you something about the kind of relationship Natalie had with boundaries. Oh good, you're both here, Carol said. We were just talking about the wedding. Of course they were. Within 10 minutes, I went from having a private conversation with my fiancé to getting pitched like an investor. Carol sat at the table and told me a wedding was the first public statement a couple makes. Brianna said the current plan was cute, in the same tone people use for children's drawings. Natalie stayed quiet just long enough to let them frame me as the only obstacle. Then Carol asked, "So you're not going to help Natalie with the card situation?" I said. "I'm not using my bonus to clean up surprise debt and upgrade things we already agreed not to upgrade." Carol blinked like I had cursed in church. Brianna laughed into her coffee. "Mark, come on, it's a wedding, not a Home Depot run." Natalie finally spoke. "Exactly, this is our wedding. Why are you acting like spending money on it is some kind of crime?" "It's not a crime," I said. "It's just not smart." And then Natalie snapped, not loud at first, cold. She stood up, looked me directly in the face and said, "If you're this stingy before we're even married, maybe there shouldn't be a wedding." The room went still. I said, "What?" She didn't blink. "You heard me. No bonus, no wedding. If you can't show up for me properly, then don't bother showing up at all." Carol put a hand on her chest like Natalie had done something brave. Brianna looked down into her cup to hide a smile, and I just sat there, because moments like that are strange. You expect yelling or panic or some huge emotional rush. But what I felt was clarity, not all at once, but enough to hear the sentence for what it was. Not stress, not fear, not pre-wedding nerves, an invoice. I stood up, took my glass of untouched wine, walked to the sink, poured it out, and said, "Fine." Natalie frowned. "Fine what?" "Fine," I repeated. "If that's the condition, then okay." She stared at me, waiting for the rest, the apology, the softening. The bargaining. It didn't come. That night she slept in the bedroom. I slept on the couch by choice, not because she told me to. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't angry. I just didn't want to lie next to someone who had turned marriage into leverage. Around midnight, while she was in the shower, I opened the wedding folder on my laptop and read every contract. Venue, caterer, photo team, DJ, florist. We were still inside the last date for partial refunds on 2 major vendors and a full pause on 1 package if requested before business hours Monday. It was Friday. I barely slept. The next morning, Natalie got ready for a dress fitting with her maid of honor. She was in that false normal mood people get into when they think the other person has had time to come to their senses. At the door, she said, "I hope you've thought about what you're doing." "I have," I said. "Good," she replied, "because I'm not marrying a man who counts every dollar and makes me beg." I looked at her for a second and said, "Drive safe." She left at 907. At 912, I called the venue. At 926, I received the cancellation terms in writing. At 941, I signed them. At 1003, I emailed the planner revoking approval for any new charges or vendor upgrades. At 1017, I called the photographer and paused the expanded package Natalie had been trying to push through. At 1044, I transferred the remaining wedding funds from my personal savings into a separate account and documented every deposit I had made versus what she had contributed. At 11:08, I sat back in silence and looked at the ring receipt in my desk drawer for a long time. At 11:19, Natalie called. I let it ring once, then answered. "What did you do?" she asked. No hello, no confusion, just fury sharpened by humiliation. I said, "I canceled the venue." Silence. "Then you what?" "You said no bonus, no wedding. I took you seriously." Her voice jumped an octave. Are you out of your mind? I was at the fitting. Do you understand how insane I look right now? I leaned back in the chair. Probably about as insane as you made me feel when you told me our wedding depended on my paycheck. You knew I didn't mean it like that. No, I said. I knew you meant it exactly like that, you just didn't think I'd respond. She started crying, but even through the tears I could hear the anger underneath. Mark, you embarrassed me. That word again. Not hurt me, not scared me, not broke my trust. Embarrassed. I said, if the wedding only works when I hand over money on command, then it doesn't work. You don't cancel a wedding over one argument. You don't make a marriage conditional over one bonus. She hung up. Then came the calls: Natalie, Carol, Brianna, maid of honor. Unknown number. Natalie again. By 12:30, my phone looked like a malfunctioning alarm. At 105, they all came back to the apartment. Natalie pounded first. Carol knocked second, in that fake polite rhythm people use when they think manners will look better later in their version of events. I opened the door, but only halfway. Natalie's eyes were red. Her makeup was smeared. Carol looked furious enough to crack tile. What the hell is wrong with you? Carol said before Natalie could speak. Nobody asked you, I said. Natalie stepped forward. Uncancel it. I almost smiled at the wording. No, she stared at me. That's it, no. That's it, Carol threw her hands up. This is abusive. I laughed then, actually laughed, because people really do reach for that word when control slips away. What's abusive, I said, is springing $9,000 of hidden debt on your fiancé and telling him there's no wedding unless he pays it. Natalie's face changed, just for a second, panic, because Carol didn't know about the debt. She turned to Natalie. 9,000. Natalie immediately snapped. That's not the point. No, I thought, it was exactly the point. I walked to the kitchen counter, grabbed the statements, and handed them to Carol. She flipped through them, slower with each page. This Miami hotel, I asked. Wedding expense. Natalie folded her arms. That was for Brianna's birthday, and I was going to pay it down. With what? She said nothing. Carol looked up from the statements and suddenly seemed much less interested in defending her daughter with full volume. Natalie, realizing the room had turned, switched tactics instantly. Her voice softened. Mark, I'm stressed. That's all this is. I said something harsh. I didn't think you'd destroy everything. And that was the moment it landed fully for me. She didn't think I'd destroy everything. Meaning she thought she could say anything as long as I still showed up afterward. Meaning the relationship had been built, at least lately, on the quiet assumption that I would absorb the disrespect because the alternative would be inconvenient. I set the papers down and said, I didn't destroy anything. I stopped funding it. She cried harder then. Real tears, maybe, but even then the center of it felt financial, not emotional. Can you please just fix this? She asked. We can do smaller upgrades later. We can figure the cards out after the honeymoon. Just please fix this. After the honeymoon. So that had been the plan. Get married first, merge consequences later. I shook my head. No, Carol muttered something under her breath and walked out. Brianna followed. Natalie stayed. The apartment was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, almost whispering, Are you really ending this? I looked at her and asked the only question that mattered. If my bonus had been 0, would you still be marrying me next month? She opened her mouth, closed it, looked away, and there it was. Not even a lie, just silence. I nodded once. That's enough. She left 30 minutes later with an overnight bag and her dress-fitting folder. She didn't slam the door. She didn't scream. She just walked out looking smaller than she had that morning. The next week was logistics. Return calls, vendor paperwork, refund percentages. Friends asking carefully worded questions. My sister coming over with takeout and not saying, I told you so, even though she absolutely could have. Natalie texted a few times, mostly long paragraphs about misunderstanding, pressure, humiliation, and how I had turned one bad moment into a life sentence. I replied only when necessary. When she asked to pick up the rest of her things, I agreed and made sure my sister was there. When she asked if we could still maybe salvage a small ceremony, I didn't answer. When she asked if I ever really loved her, I stared at the message for a while and realized that was the wrong question. Love wasn't the issue. The issue was whether love had been expected to function like a payment plan. 2 weeks later, she came by for the last box. No makeup, no audience, no performance. She stood by the door holding a cardboard box with shoes and framed photos and said, "I know how this looks." I said nothing. She gave a small, tired laugh. "That means it looks bad." "It means," I said, "I don't want to fight." She nodded. Then, after a second, she slipped the ring off her finger and placed it on the entry table. "I guess this belongs here," she said. I looked at it. Not because I wanted it back. Just because it was strange how small it looked off her hand, how ordinary. She picked up the box and paused. "I did want to marry you, you know." I believed that, in a way. I just believed she also wanted the lifestyle, the optics, the rescue, the family approval, the upgraded version of everything. And somewhere in that pile, I had become less a person than a provider with a pulse. So I said the most honest thing I had. "I think you wanted me. I'm not sure you wanted limits." She looked like she wanted to argue, then didn't. She left. That was 3 months ago. I got most of the refunds back, lost some deposits, kept the bonus. Paid off my truck early. Rebuilt the emergency fund. Slept better than I had in a year. The apartment feels quieter now, but not empty. Just honest. Every now and then, someone hears the story through mutual friends and asks if I really canceled a wedding over one sentence. But that's not what happened. I canceled it over what the sentence revealed. No bonus, no wedding wasn't an outburst. It was a price point. And once I understood that, the easiest decision of my adult life became canceling the most expensive mistake I almost made.